Greetings and welcome to your daily walk through the scripture for March the 23rd. Your readings today found you in Deuteronomy chapter 2 and chapter 3, Luke chapter 6 verses 12 through 38, Proverbs 67 1 through 7, Psalm 67 1 through 7, and Proverbs chapter 11 verse 27. Now, we're gonna look at Luke for a second, and we're gonna actually focus on one particular set of verses. Now, what you see in Luke is really his version of the Sermon on the Mount. This is a condensed version of the Sermon on the Mount that he gives here, and you'll see a lot of similarities between what Jesus said in the book of Matthew and his Beatitudes and what Jesus says here in Luke. But one of the things that is used a lot in our world today actually happens to be verse 37 of this chapter here in Luke, when it says, "Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Given, it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." Now, a lot of times, people will use this verse, and they will say things like, "Judge not, lest ye be judged." And they'll go King James on it, which is really ironic because they don't like the King James, but that's all they knew. They grew up with it or something. And it's misused a lot of times, because when we talk about judgment, especially as Christians, there are actually two standards of judgment for followers of Christ. The first one is how we judge the world. Now, as Christians, God makes it very clear that we cannot hold the world to the same standard that followers of Christ can. What I mean by that is that a world that does not know Christ cannot be judged by those who do know Christ. In other words, we can't expect the world who doesn't know Jesus to hold to the same standard and to the same moral compass that followers of Christ do. This is one of the things I think that really kind of confuses us at times when we look at the things that the world does, and we look at it and we think, how can they not see this? For example, when we talk about abortion, and Christians oftentimes hold a very different view of abortion from what the rest of the world does. And that has to do with how our moral compass is. And a follower of Christ, the moral compass for a Christian is Bible. What does the Bible say? And the Bible talks a lot about life and the valuing of life, from the Old Testament all the way up through Jesus and into the New Testament, the starting of the church. Life is valued, and God values life, and that's the moral compass with which Christians use. The world doesn't have that same moral compass, and so they're not going to respond in the same way. And so it's up to us as Christians to figure out how to show and convey love to them while still holding on to God's truth. But we cannot hold them to the same standard. Thus, we cannot judge them. All right? That's where that comes from. Okay? Now, the second part for Christians is, however, we are called to hold one another accountable. We are supposed to look at those other people who profess to be Christians, and we are to hold ourselves and them accountable. That's actually what Jesus is talking about when he says, before you judge someone with the speck in their eye, pull the plank out of your own eye. That's what he's talking about when he speaks to that. That's what he's talking about here in verse 41. I know I'm cheating. We don't quite get there yet, but this is kind of the general idea. When you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye, pay no attention to the plank in your own. In other words, we need to understand that we are being judged by the very same standard by which we judge someone else as a follower of Christ, which means whenever we approach someone that we see struggling with something, we need to approach them with humility, with love, and with kindness, and with the understanding that we often have a huge, massive plank in our own eye. And here's a little free tidbit for you. A lot of times the things that bothers us about other Christians actually has to be something within our own personality that is also a flaw or a fault or a shortcoming. So when something annoys us about someone else, a lot of times it might be our own annoying trait. So we should take this seriously. We should be very careful how we judge the world, but also other Christians. We should do so in humility and love and in grace. And remember that while we can't hold the world to the same standard that Jesus does, we should hold one another accountable. And not only that, but we should embrace accountability by our fellow Christians, not with an air of judgment, but with an air of support and encouragement and desire to all together be better at pursuing Christ. Okay, there's our conversation for today. We'll talk next time.